The slap echoed louder than it should have. Not because of the force, but because of the silence that followed. Have you ever had a moment where everything around you just stops? Conversations die mid-sentence. Glasses freeze halfway to lips. Even the air feels like it's holding its breath. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. That was mine. 1 second, I was sitting at a candlelit anniversary dinner. 5 years of marriage. A celebration, right? The next, my head snapped to the side, my cheek burning, and the delicate stem of my wine glass slipped from my fingers. It hit the table, then shattered. No one moved. Not my husband, not my parents, not even the woman sitting across from me, the one smiling like she'd been waiting for that exact moment. And that's when I knew. This wasn't an argument. This was a setup. My name is Elena Voss. I'm 32 years old, and up until that night, I thought I understood the people closest to me. I was wrong. Let me take you back, just a few minutes earlier before everything cracked open. The restaurant was one of those places where everything whispers money. Soft lighting, marble tables, staff who glide instead of walk. Daniel chose it, said it was special. That should have been my first clue, because Daniel doesn't do special unless there's an angle. He sat across from me, perfectly composed in his tailored suit. No smile, no warmth, just waiting. To my right, my mother, Marianne, adjusted her napkin for the third time in 5 minutes. Avoiding eye contact. My father, Richard, sat rigid, one hands folded like he was attending a board meeting instead of his daughter's anniversary dinner. And then there was her. Lila Hart, 27. She wasn't supposed to be there. Introduced casually as a business associate, like that explained anything. But she didn't look like someone out of place. No, she looked very comfortable, too comfortable. Her hand rested lightly on the table, close to Daniel's, not touching, but close enough to make a statement. And her smile? It wasn't friendly, it was patient. Dinner hadn't even been served when Daniel reached into his briefcase. Not a gift, not flowers, a folder. He slid it across the table toward me, smooth and deliberate. No explanation, just, sign it. That's all he said. No build-up, no context, just those 2 words. I remember blinking at him, waiting for the punchline. Daniel, what is this? Open it. His tone wasn't angry. It was worse, flat, controlled. Like he'd already had this conversation in his head, and my part didn't matter. So I opened it. And the moment I saw the first page, my stomach dropped. Legal documents, transfer of ownership. My company, Voss Botanicals, listed in black and white. Every share, every asset, every right, being handed over to Lila Hart. Let me ask you something. What would you do in that moment? Laugh, thinking it's a joke? Get angry? Or just freeze? Because that's what I did. I looked up slowly, from the papers to Daniel, then to Lila. And that's when she finally spoke. Soft, calm, almost amused. It's just a formality, Elena. A formality. Like she was asking me to pass the salt. I felt something shift inside me. Not panic, not yet. Yet something colder. Because suddenly little things started clicking into place. The way she was wearing a prototype serum, one that hadn't even launched yet. The way Daniel didn't correct her, didn't explain, didn't deny. And then I turned to my parents, because surely this was where it stopped. Mom, Dad? My voice didn't sound like mine. This is a joke, right? My father didn't hesitate. Not even a second. It's the smart decision, Elena. Smart decision. My mother finally looked at me, but only briefly. This is what's best. Best. For who? The room felt smaller, the air heavier, and then Daniel leaned forward slightly and said something that didn't just confuse me, it chilled me. You don't really have a choice. And right there, right in that moment, I realized something was very, very wrong. But I still didn't know how deep it went. Not yet. You don't really have a choice. Let that sink in for a second. What does that even mean? Because I'll tell you what it should mean. Nothing. Not to me. Not to the woman who built her company from the ground up, who signed every contract, led every deal, took every risk. And yet, the way Daniel said it, it didn't sound like a threat. It sounded like a fact. I remember staring at him, searching his face for something, anything, familiar. Regret, hesitation, even anger. There was none. Just calm certainty. Like he had already won. Explain, I said. One word, steady, controlled. Because if there's one thing I've learned in business, it's this. When someone thinks they have power over you, the worst thing you can do is panic. Daniel leaned back in his chair, I crossing one leg over the other like we were discussing quarterly profits. It's simple, he said. You transfer the company tonight. Tonight, not next week, not after a discussion. Tonight. That's when Lila shifted slightly, finally leaning forward, her eyes locking onto mine. And this time, her smile widened. You'll still be taken care of, she added softly. Taken care of, like I was being downgraded from owner to dependent. I looked back down at the papers. That's when I saw it. My signature. Already there. Not on everything, but on enough. Documents dated months ago. Clauses buried in legal language, amendments, adjustments, ownership restructuring. My chest tightened because I remembered signing things. Of course I did. Expansion contracts, investor agreements. Our routine paperwork Daniel had assured me was standard. And I trusted him. That was the first mistake. Daniel, I said slowly, tapping the page. What exactly did you have me sign? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, my father did. You should have paid more attention, Richard said, his tone sharp, almost irritated. This is business, not a hobby. A hobby? That word hit harder than the slap that hadn't happened yet. Because this company was never a hobby. It was years of 2 a.m. nights, failed prototypes, empty bank accounts, risk after risk after risk, and he reduced it to that? I looked at my mother again, hoping, still hoping, for something, anything, support, doubt, a flicker of concern, but she just folded her hands tighter in her lap. Elena, she said quietly, Daniel is thinking about your future. My future. No, he was erasing it. The pieces were starting to come together now, and I didn't like the picture they were forming. Lila's sudden rise in the company, Daniel's increasing control over financial decisions, the legal documents I hadn't fully reviewed, my parents suddenly urging me to trust my husband more. This wasn't spontaneous. This was coordinated, planned, executed, and I was the last one to realize it. I exhaled slowly, placing the papers back on the table. Then I looked at each of them, one by one. Daniel, Lila, my father, my mother, 4 people, all waiting, all expecting the same outcome. Why her? I asked, my voice quieter now. Not emotional, not angry, just precise. Because that was the real question, wasn't it? Not just what they were doing, but why. Lila didn't hesitate this time. Because I'm better for the company. Simple, direct, no shame, no hesitation. And the way Daniel didn't correct her, that told me everything I needed to know. Something inside me settled. Not broke. Settled. Like a final piece clicking into place. Because now I understood. This wasn't just about business. This wasn't just about control. This was betrayal. Layered. Calculated. Complete. I straightened slightly in my chair, my cheek still stinging faintly from where tension had already started building in my body. And I said the only word that made sense. The only word they clearly hadn't prepared for. No. Silence. Real silence this time. Not the tense kind, the shocked kind. Daniel blinked once. Lila's smile faltered, just slightly. My father's jaw tightened. Oh, and my mother? Finally looked at me. And that's when everything changed. Because Daniel leaned forward again. Faster this time. Less controlled. And his voice dropped. Cold. Dangerously quiet. You don't seem to understand what's happening. I held his gaze. Didn't move. Didn't back down. And repeated, No. What happened next? That was the moment everyone in that room would remember. For very different reasons. The second time I said no, the room stopped pretending. Have you ever watched someone's mask fall in real time? Not slip, not crack, fall. That was Daniel. For one brief second, the polished husband disappeared. The charming public face. The controlled investor. The man who knew exactly which smile to wear in which room. What surfaced instead was something rawer, meaner, and much more familiar than I wanted to admit. "You're making this harder than it has to be," he said. His voice was low, but it carried, the kind of voice meant to sound calm while delivering a threat. I didn't answer right away. I just looked at him. Really looked at him. And once I did, I couldn't unsee it. This wasn't a man making a desperate decision. This was a man irritated that his plan was taking longer than expected. That mattered. Because desperate people improvise. Calculated people rehearse. And Daniel had rehearsed this. If you had met him 5 years earlier, you probably would have liked him. Everyone did. Daniel Voss, 36, smooth, successful. The kind of man who knew how to hold eye contact just long enough to make you feel chosen. He knew which wine to order, what to say to my parents, and when to act supportive in public. He never needed to be the loudest person in the room because he was always studying it. When we met, Voss Botanicals was still small. It was mine then in every visible way. My formulas, my branding, my sleepless nights. I'd started it at 26 in a rented studio apartment, mixing test batches on a folding table and filling orders myself. I built it the ugly way. No glamorous launch, no trust fund, no safety net. Daniel came in later, right when the company stopped being a scrappy dream and started becoming something real. At first, he was helpful. That's the dangerous kind, isn't it? Not the obvious villain, the useful one. He introduced me to distributors, helped me network with investors. Mine sat beside me in meetings and spoke just enough to make people think he was part of the bigger strategy. I let that happen because I was tired, overworked, and, this part matters, I believed marriage meant partnership. But slowly, things shifted. Not all at once, never all at once. He started asking to review contracts to take stress off my plate. Then he wanted access to internal financial dashboards for transparency. Then he suggested combining certain legal functions to simplify operations. Every step sounded reasonable on its own. That's how people get trapped. Not through one giant lie, through 50 small permissions. And then there was Lila Hart. She entered the picture 8 months earlier as a marketing consultant. 27. Smart, polished, camera-ready. She knew branding language, social growth strategy, my luxury presentation, all the things a fast-scaling company needs. On paper, she made sense. In person, something was off immediately. She learned too quickly where all the invisible doors were. Who to flatter, who to ignore, which employees were loyal to me, and which ones could be swayed by proximity to Daniel. She wasn't just ambitious, she was positioning. At first, I told myself I was being unfair. Women in business get judged harshly enough. I didn't want to become one more woman distrusting another woman just because she was confident. But then she started making decisions without asking me. Minor ones first. Branding revisions, meeting reschedules. Product launch suggestions communicated to my staff before I approved them. Every time I pushed back, Daniel stepped in. "Elena, she's trying to help." "Elena, I don't make this personal. Elena, you need to delegate." That word, delegate. Funny how often women are told to delegate the things men are trying to take. Then the stranger things began. Legal emails I never received but was somehow copied on. Meeting notes, summarizing decisions I had never made. A draft ownership memo tucked into a stack of routine filings. And once, just once, I caught Lila walking out of Daniel's office late at night, smoothing her hair, both of them startled to see me. He laughed it off. She smiled. I said nothing, but I remembered. And sitting there now, at that anniversary dinner from hell, one memory hit me harder than the rest. 3 months earlier, Daniel had brought me a stack of documents after a 14-hour production crisis. We'd had a supplier issue, a packaging delay, and one investor threatening to pull support unless we stabilized distribution. I was exhausted, barely thinking straight. "Just standard restructuring language," he'd said. "You need to sign tonight so legal can file in the morning." I signed. Because I trusted my husband. Because I was tired. Because sometimes the moment that ruins you doesn't feel dramatic at all. It feels administrative. Back at the table, my fingers pressed lightly against the edge of the transfer papers. My father looked annoyed. My mother looked nervous. Lila looked patient. Daniel looked dangerous. And for the first time, I let myself ask the question I had avoided for months. How much had they already taken? I didn't know the answer yet, but I knew one thing. If those signatures from months ago were part of this, then tonight was only the last step of a much bigger plan. And I was suddenly terrified of what I'd discover next. By the time I walked out of that restaurant, they thought it was over. That's the part that still stands out to me. Not the slap, not the papers, not even my parents sitting there like silent witnesses to their own daughter being dismantled. No, it was the look on Daniel's face as I stood up and left. Relief. Like a problem had just removed itself. Let me ask you something. If someone walks away that calmly after being humiliated like that, do you really think they've given up? Or have they already decided something you don't know yet? The cold air outside hit me instantly, sharp and grounding. My cheeks still burned, but I barely felt it anymore. Oh, adrenaline does that. It dulls the obvious pain so you can focus on the real threat. And the real threat wasn't the slap. It was what those documents represented. Control, ownership, erasure. My hands were steady when I reached for my phone. That surprised me. Because inside, everything was moving fast, pieces connecting, patterns locking into place. But outwardly, still, focused, deliberate. I scrolled once, tapped a name, and lifted the phone to my ear. She picked up on the second ring. Tell me you didn't sign anything tonight? No greeting, no hesitation, just that. Avery Cole, 40, corporate attorney. The only person who had looked at my situation weeks ago and said something no one else had the courage or clarity to say, I think your husband is trying to outmaneuver you legally. At the time, I didn't want to believe her. Now? I didn't sign, I said. A pause. Then, good, Avery replied. Calm, controlled. Because if you had, this would be a very different conversation. I leaned against the side of the building, the restaurant's warm glow behind me, the quiet street stretching ahead like a blank slate. They already have something, I said. Documents, my signature. Months old. I know, she said. That made me straighten. You know? Yes, Avery continued. I pulled your company filings after our last meeting. There were amendments submitted, ownership restructuring clauses, but the timing didn't match your official board approvals. Translation: something had been filed using my authority, without my full awareness. Here's where it gets important, because this wasn't just about betrayal anymore. This was about legality. And legality doesn't care about emotions. It cares about proof. They're trying to transfer everything to her, I said. Tonight. Another pause, but this one felt different. Not surprised, calculated. Good, Avery said. I blinked. Good? Yes, she repeated, because that means they're rushing. Now think about that. Why would someone rush something like this? Because when people rush, they make mistakes. You told me to wait, I said quietly, to not confront them. And you did exactly that, Avery replied. Which means we have something much more valuable now. Which is? Intent. That word hung in the air. Intent. Not suspicion, not theory. Intent. They didn't just prepare to take my company. They acted. Publicly. Witnessed. Documented. I've been gathering everything since you came to me, Avery continued. Email chains, filing inconsistencies, timestamp discrepancies, even internal communications your husband assumed you'd never see. My grip tightened slightly on the phone. How bad is it? A small exhale on the other end. Bad enough, she said, that if we play this correctly, they're not just losing the company. A beat. They're exposing themselves. And just like that, the power shifted. Not emotionally, not visibly, but structurally. Because here's the truth most people don't realize. The moment someone tries to quietly take everything from you, they also risk losing everything themselves. What do you need from me? I asked. Nothing, Avery said. Well, you've already done the hard part. Which is? You didn't react? That hit deeper than I expected, because she was right. Every instinct I had at that table, anger, betrayal, humiliation, I buried it. I didn't argue. I didn't scream. I didn't give them anything messy to use against me. I'm 5 minutes away, Avery said. Stay where you are. No, I replied, pushing myself off the wall, already turning back toward the restaurant doors. I'm not staying out here. A pause. Then, good, she said again. I walked back toward the entrance, each step slower than it should have been, but more certain. Because now, I wasn't walking back in as the woman they had cornered. I was walking back in as the variable they hadn't accounted for. And inside that restaurant, they were still sitting at that table. I'm still thinking they were in control, still believing the next move was theirs. They had no idea. They had just triggered the one move they couldn't undo. When those doors opened, I didn't walk back in as the same person who walked out. That version of me, the one who still expected fairness, who still looked at the people at that table and saw something worth saving, she stayed outside. What walked back in was quieter, colder, precise. Have you ever noticed how power doesn't always look loud? Sometimes it's just certainty. The restaurant hadn't changed. Same soft lighting, same murmured conversations, same carefully curated calm. But our table? It was different. Tension had settled into it like a weight. Daniel looked up first as I approached. His expression flickered. Not fear, not yet, but irritation. You forgot something? He asked, leaning back in his chair like he still owned the moment. I didn't answer. I just took my seat, calmly, deliberately. Then I placed my phone on the table, screen down. Lila's eyes narrowed slightly. My father exhaled sharply through his nose. My mother shifted in her seat. They were waiting. For an apology, for compliance, for me to fold. Instead, I said something simple. She's on her way. Daniel frowned. Who? Right on cue. The doors behind me opened. Not dramatically, not loudly, but enough. And something in the room shifted. A woman stepped inside. Mid-40s, tailored dark suit. Hair pulled back, not a strand out of place. No hesitation in her stride. No need to scan the room. She already knew exactly where she was going. Avery Cole. And she didn't walk like someone entering a restaurant. She walked like someone entering a negotiation she had already prepared to win. She reached the table, placed a structured leather folder down in front of Daniel. Not me. Daniel. And spoke clearly. You have 5 minutes. Silence. Real silence this time. Because tone matters. And hers? It wasn't a suggestion. Daniel let out a short, almost amused breath. I'm sorry, who exactly are you supposed to be? Avery Cole, she replied evenly. Corporate counsel. A slight pause. Not yours. That landed. You could see it. In the way his posture shifted just slightly. In the way Lila's fingers curled against the edge of the table. My father tried to interject. This is a private matter. No, Avery cut in smoothly, in turning her gaze to him for just a fraction of a second. It stopped being private the moment fraudulent filings were submitted under her name. Fraudulent. The word didn't explode. It sank. Heavy. Daniel's expression hardened. Be very careful with accusations like that. Oh, I am, Avery replied, opening the folder. Which is why everything here is documented. She slid the first document across the table, then another, each one placed with surgical precision. I didn't look at them. I didn't need to, because I was watching them. And their reactions? That was everything. Lila's composure cracked first, just slightly, a flicker in her eyes as she scanned the pages. Daniel followed. His confidence didn't disappear, but it shifted, from control to calculation. What exactly is your point? He asked. I'm still trying, still holding the line. Avery clasped her hands lightly in front of her. My point, she said, her voice calm, almost conversational, is that the ownership restructuring you initiated relies on documents that were signed under conditions that raise significant legal concerns. A pause. Then, timing discrepancies, undisclosed amendments, an intent to transfer controlling interest without informed consent. My mother looked at me then, really looked, for the first time that night, and I saw it. Doubt. Daniel leaned forward slightly. You're reaching. Am I? Avery tilted her head just enough to suggest interest. Because from where I'm standing, this looks less like a business transition. Another document slid forward. And more like a coordinated attempt to strip a majority stakeholder of her company. That word again. Coordinated. Now it wasn't just in my head, it was on paper. The table felt smaller, tighter, like the walls themselves were leaning in. So here's what's gonna happen, Avery continued. No, Daniel cut in sharply, his voice rising just enough to break the calm. Here's what's gonna happen. She signs the documents, and we move forward like planned. And that's when Avery said it, the line that changed everything. You can try that, she said evenly, a beat. But if you do... Her eyes flicked briefly to the documents, then back to him. We proceed with filing formal charges by morning. Charges. Not threats, not warnings. Charges. The word didn't echo. It settled, like something final. And Daniel turned to me then. Really turned. And for the first time that night, there was something new in his expression. Not anger, not control. Uncertainty. You plan this? He asked. I held his gaze. Didn't answer. Didn't need to. Because the truth? This was never about planning. It was about not being as powerless as they thought. And now, for the first time all night, they were the ones running out of options. You planned this? Daniel's voice didn't carry the same weight anymore. That confidence, the one he walked into the restaurant with, was gone, replaced by something thinner, something unstable. I didn't answer him, I just watched, because at this point, words weren't necessary. Everything that mattered was already sitting on that table. In ink. In evidence. In consequences. Have you ever seen someone realize, in real time, that the situation they thought they controlled has already slipped past them? That's what this was. Not an explosion. A collapse. Slow. Inevitable. Daniel looked down at the documents again, this time more carefully. Not skimming, not dismissing. Reading. And the longer he read, the tighter his jaw became. What is this supposed to prove? He asked, but the edge in his voice had dulled. Avery didn't rush her response. That the ownership restructuring you initiated, she said calmly, was built on manipulated timing, withheld disclosures, and coercive execution. She tapped one of the pages. Specifically, signatures obtained during periods of documented operational stress, paired with amendments that were not clearly disclosed in their final form. Let's translate that. They didn't just trick me. They engineered the moment I would be most likely to sign without questioning. Exhaustion, pressure, urgency, and then buried the real changes inside documents designed to look routine. Daniel exhaled slowly, leaning back. This is circumstantial. No, Avery replied, sliding another sheet forward. This is corroborated. Emails, internal messages, timestamp mismatches. Even communication between Daniel and Lila discussing finalizing control before she notices. That one hit differently, because now it wasn't just strategy, it was intent. Clear, undeniable. Lila pushed her chair back slightly. This is ridiculous, she said, but her voice lacked the earlier smoothness. Everyone signs things they don't read thoroughly. That's not illegal. Avery's eyes moved to her. You're right, she said. A beat. But orchestrating that oversight is. Silence again. But this time, it wasn't shock. It was calculation. Everyone at the table was doing the same thing now, running outcomes, estimating damage, realizing how far this could go. My father spoke next. This doesn't need to escalate, Richard said, his tone shifting into something more diplomatic. We can resolve this privately. Privately, of course. Because public consequences, those would be devastating. Avery didn't even look at him. That depends entirely on how quickly we correct what's already been done. Then she turned to Daniel, and for the first time, her voice sharpened, just slightly. Here are your options. She slid a final set of documents forward, clean, direct, decisive. You sign these, she said, which immediately void the prior restructuring, restore full controlling interest to Elena, and acknowledge the invalidity of the transfer attempt. A pause. Or, she didn't raise her voice, didn't need to. We proceed with formal filings in the morning: fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, civil damages, and potential criminal review. That was it. No theatrics, no exaggeration, just reality. And reality, it landed. Daniel didn't speak immediately. He just stared at the papers, then at me, then back at the papers. For the first time since this started, he didn't look like the man in control. He looked like someone cornered. "You'd actually do this?" he asked. Not to Avery, to me. And there it was, the shift. He wasn't negotiating with the situation anymore. He was trying to negotiate with me. I met his gaze. Unsteady, unmoved. "Yes," I said. One word. No anger, no hesitation, no emotion for him to work with. And that's when it broke. Not loudly, not dramatically, but completely. Daniel grabbed the pen. Not aggressively, not reluctantly, just decisively. Because he understood something now that he hadn't before. This wasn't a bluff. This wasn't recoverable. He signed. Lila's reaction was immediate. "You're just going to," she started, but stopped herself. Because there was nothing to argue anymore. My mother looked like she wanted to speak. She didn't. My father looked like he wanted to negotiate. He couldn't, because the moment Daniel signed, the entire structure they had built collapsed. But here's the part most people don't think about. The story doesn't end when the papers are signed. That's just the pivot. What comes after? That's what defines everything. I didn't walk away from it. I followed through, every step. Within a week, formal legal proceedings were initiated, not out of revenge, out of necessity, because if someone is willing to do this once, they'll do it again. Daniel charges were filed: fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, his professional reputation destroyed, investors pulled back, partnerships dissolved. The same network he used to elevate himself closed ranks against him. Lila complicit, named in the filings. Her career, built on perception and access, collapsed almost overnight. Because in industries like ours, trust isn't optional, and once it's gone, it doesn't come back. That part was quieter, but not lighter. They reached out. Of course they did. Calls, messages, explanations. And it wasn't supposed to go this far. We thought it was structured differently. We were trying to protect stability. But here's the thing. Intent doesn't erase participation. I didn't argue with them, didn't yell, didn't try to make them understand. I just stopped answering, because sometimes the clearest boundary is silence. I restructured everything, every access point, every legal safeguard, every internal control. No more blind trust, no more shared authority without visibility. And, ironically, the company didn't suffer. It grew, stronger, cleaner, more resilient. Publicly, the situation surfaced in fragments. Not everything, but enough. Enough for people to understand what had happened. And the narrative, it didn't frame me as a victim. It framed me as someone who didn't fold. People expect moments like that to feel victorious, like some kind of triumph. It didn't. It felt quiet. Because standing there, after everything, looking at Daniel, at Lila, at my parents, I didn't feel anger anymore, just clarity. They hadn't changed. They had revealed themselves, and that mattered more. Months later, a new launch event. Same industry, same stakes, different version of me. No Daniel, no Lila, no family at my side. Just me and everything I built. Fully mine again. Someone approached me near the end of the night. A journalist. Polite, curious. "Do you regret any of it?" they asked. I considered the question. Not long, just enough. Then I answered honestly, "No." A small pause. It showed me exactly who I was dealing with. And that was it. No dramatic ending, no lingering questions. Just clarity, control, and a life that, finally, no one else had a hand in taking from me.